Hello guys, welcome to the first episode of this tutorial of this playlist where we are going to learn about lit. And as before, we're gonna have a tutorial of let's say 10 episodes. We're gonna learn about the theoretical concepts and we're gonna implement them inside of a real application. I've got my notes here on this desktop. On my other desktop, I have, VS Code. I've created this, lit project using Vite. I'm going to show you the code that you need to run in order to get, let's say, a simple project template created for you using Vite. And I am running this on my machine, as you can see here. So we're going to go through the notes. As always, we're going to study the concepts and we're going to complete the application step by step using the code that I've got in these, tutorial in these episodes. So as before, you can find the link to the, project files inside of the description of this video, and feel free to, leave a comment, to like the video. That really, keeps me motivated. You can also, share the playlist or specific video with someone who's learning about lit. So the other thing is that I'm assuming you do not know anything about lit, right? So you want to learn this, but you have some experience with other, front-end frameworks and libraries, like for example React. If you don't, have any experience, that's fine too. But it would be better to have some, experience with them, because that'll help you to compare the differences and the benefits of using lit and other, let's say, libraries or frameworks like React, Angular, and so on. So of course there's some differences, some similarities. Being aware of those will enable you to make an informed decision when you want to develop an application. And that's it. Let's get started and see what we are going to learn. So the goal of this episode, as you can see, is to understand what lit is, when we're going to use it, set up a modern development environment using Vite. First, before we get to the topic of lit, I would like to talk a little bit about web components, right? So web components are a way to create custom reusable HTML elements. We all know that there are, some standard HTML elements like p tag or div tag or anchor tag, but web components are those custom HTML elements that you, create for your own projects. Like for example, you want to have a specific personalized, let's say, HTML element called my button or user card or to-do list. That work like built-in HTML tags. So these are web components. Now, key features of web components. First, they're custom elements. So you define your own tags, your own HTML template. Shadow DOM. Using Shadow DOM, you isolate your component's internal HTML and styles, and you kind of protect the styles and the HTML of those web components that you have created. You do not let other people or other code to kind of interfere with your internal HTML or styles. HTML templates, you can define reusable HTML templates the way you want them, right? And native, they run in the browser without extra frameworks. So they're like native HTML elements, like a paragraph tag, an anchor tag, like an image tag, but they're custom. They have their own HTML, their own styles. They're reusable. You can use them as many times as you want. You can make them very specific, and of course you're going to protect their internal HTML and style from the outside world. I mentioned Shadow DOM here, right? Let's talk a little bit about Shadow DOM. So what is the Shadow DOM? The Shadow DOM is like a capsule for your component. So it gives your custom element a private space to write HTML and CSS so that you can protect your, your component. So the styles inside of your, web component don't affect the outside world, and the styles from outside don't mess up with your component. So using the concept of Shadow DOM, you will have, let's say, you will have the means to encapsulate your web component without interfering with the outside world, and also without letting the outside world interfere with your own custom elements. Let's go through an example. Let's say you create a user card element with some styles, right? And then you use it. Now, without Shadow DOM, if someone else add this style, for example, if there is a P, set the color to red, and suppose you have defined a P inside of this web component. Now, without Shadow DOM, it might change the colors inside of your user card as well. Of course, given that you have used a P tag inside of your user card, because nothing has been encapsulated. But with Shadow DOM, your internal styles are protected. So for example, suppose this is, your component that you have created. And we're gonna go through this, by the way. So as you can see, we have an internal style. The color has been set to blue. And then we have the HTML template, as you can see here, right? And then we're gonna use this. We're gonna use this, user card. And I'm gonna show you this example and other, more complicated examples as we go through the tutorial. But the idea is that using web components and, Shadow DOM, because the style of your web component is encapsulated here, other people cannot interfere with the paragraph tag that you're using here. So no one is going to be able to change the color of this P tag because you maintain your internal style for your component. So this way the paragraph inside user card stays blue no matter what styles exist outside. So that was the idea of, let's say, web components, right, that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and also the Shadow DOM. Now, the reason why I decided to introduce web components and Shadow DOM briefly is that they're very important to understand the concept behind Lit and what Lit wants to do for us. Now, let's talk a little bit about Lit itself. So Lit is a small, fast, and expressive library for building web components. We know what web components are right now. So unlike React or Vue, it's not a framework or library, a big library, right? It's just one lightweight, fast, a small, expressive library built on top of native browser features, like, for example, custom elements and Shadow DOM. So compare this. If you're, a React developer, compare the idea behind Lit with the idea behind React. So React, it's like a big library that you can use to kind of develop a full-featured application. But with Lit, you've got like an expressive, fast, lightweight library for developing web components based on the features of your browser, like Shadow DOM or custom elements. Now, without Lit, you have to write a lot of boilerplate if you want to create web components. You need to manage a lot of templates, rendering, and properties. But of course, Lit does the heavy lifting for you, as they say. So with Lit, you get easy templating like JSX but native, auto update when properties change, and a cleaner syntax. So it's like, as they say, it's like a sugar coat for creating web components. So it kind of, abstracts away so many different, complexities that you encounter if you want to develop your own web components. Why use Lit again? So because it is very lightweight, native web component standard, great for designing systems and embedding components in any tech stack, and fast rendering using a virtual DOM-like mechanism. The tools that we're going to use in this tutorial, of course, is Vite as our build tool. We're going to use TypeScript, and of course the core library, which is Lit. And in order to create the project, this is the code that you need to run. So you're going to use Vite as your build tool, right? And the template that I'm going to use is vanilla TypeScript, and then I'm going to install this Lit library. So this is what I have already done. I showed you, right? This is the code that I have already done, and this has created this application for me. So then we're gonna set up the folder structure. Of course, we're gonna have a component called book card, and then we're gonna have some other files that we're gonna talk about little by little. But the important thing is this: after you set up the project, you get the following example element by default. Let's go through it to better understand what's going on. So when you create your project, if you take a look here, inside of this project, you get this myelement.ts. So this is a simple example of a custom element or component using Lit. I have decided to talk about this because there are so many important and useful, concepts being used here. If we study this, if we understand what is going on here, we will be able to develop our own elements, effectively. So let's talk about this. As you can see, we've got this code, which is the, default component created using lit. Now let's go through this chunk by chunk to better understand what is happening. First, we've got some imports. So we've got some imports for lit element. So this is the base class to create a web component, as you can see here. So if you take a look at the code, this, my element class is extending lit element. So this is the base class that we're going to use. We've got HTML, tagged HTML, function to write HTML inside JavaScript. We're going to see some examples of using this CSS tagged template function for scoped styles. Then we've got an import for custom element. So a custom element, as you can see, it's a decorator to register your component with a tag name. So, if I take you to the code, you can see here that I'm using this custom element as a decorator, and I am choosing a name for this component. So this is my element. So whenever I want to use this, all I need to do, as you can see here, is to, invoke the web component using the name I have chosen using this custom element decorator. That's it. So it's a decorator to register your component with a tag name, similar to, for example, the decorator called component in Angular, right? The property makes a class field reactive, changes in value, update the DOM. So this is something that we're gonna, talk a lot about, how to make reactive fields so that whenever something changes, the DOM gets updated. And let logo or with logo images being important to be displayed. So these are some of the imports that we've got. The next one, component declaration and decorators. I already talked about these two. The component extends this base type, and of course we're adding this decorator. So @custom component, my element, registers this class as a new HTML element, my element. We're going to use this name. The class my element extends lit element, meaning that it's a web component with a shadow DOM. So whenever using lit you want to create a web component, you need to extend this type. Reactive properties. We've got a couple of properties, and we're going to decorate our properties using this decorator, right? And of course we can, as you can see here, we can specify a type as well. So the first property, it's called docs hint. So it's a string property that can update the template and count a number that tracks how many times a button is clicked. So both are decorated with properties, so changing them automatically renders the component. So whenever you want to have some reactive properties, when I say reactive, it means that when the value changes inside of these properties, the template of your web component gets updated automatically. These are reactive properties. When you want to create reactive properties, all you need to do is to decorate those properties using the @property decorator. Then we've got the render method. So as you can see, the render method is where you are going to define the template of your web component, right? So take a look here. It's simple HTML code. So you've got, two anchor tags, and then you've got something very important, slot. So I'm going to talk about a slot here. As you can see here, I've got, a very, let's say, dedicated, section in my note about slots. So yeah, we have a slot, and then we have another div tag, right? And then we have a p tag, and we have, these different, for example, pieces of code. As you can see here, we are, for example, reading the values inside of our reactive properties. Do you remember the two reactive properties that we had here, docs hint and count? So we are reading the values inside of these two properties using this notation. And I'm going to talk about onClick as well. And then we are also reading the values inside of these, and I'm going to talk about them shortly. So this render defines the HTML layout inside of the component using this piece of code. So as you can see here, this is the HTML that we rendered, right? Do you remember we rendered this? So if I take you to the imports, this is the HTML we imported, and we're using it inside of our render method. So yeah, we're using the HTML. Then we've got slots. So I'm going to talk about slots in this episode. Slots are, allow you to let the outside world, the outside of your, web component to do something, to insert something inside of your component. So it's like a placeholder, right, that you provide to the outside world, and that, outside code can inject something, can put something inside of that slot. And then you've got @click. So this is, kind of an event listener for the click event of that button, right? Adds a click event listener to the button, and it uses the reactive properties, as I showed you, count and docstring, to display dynamic content. Now let's talk about the event handler. So as you can see here, we are handling the click event of this button using an event handler, and we are showing the number of times that count has been, let's say, incremented inside of the button itself. So every time the button is clicked, count is incremented. This is the code that we've got inside of our event handler. So because count is a reactive property, this is a reactive property, whenever the value changes, the template gets updated automatically. Let me take you to the code. So these are the two, reactive properties that we talked about. This is the render section, and then this is the event handler. And the event handler is being used here, right, as the event handler for the click event of the button. And then we have another section for the styles. So styles, or scoped styles, scoped CSS. So these are the specific styles that you want to set for your component. So static styles are scoped to the component thanks to Shadow DOM. We already talked about the way Shadow DOM protects our component from the outside world. Then we have this special syntax. This targets the component itself, my element, right? So you can specify some stylings for the component itself. By the way, we are using that CSS here as well. So for the template, we used HTML. For the styles, we're using CSS. Then we've got, slotted H1 styles. Styles, any H1 passed into the slot. So we talked about slot, right? We said that slot is like a placeholder that the outside world can put some item, some HTML code in, right? And then you can define some styles for the code that the outside world is going to put there. So given that the outside world, the user, the consumer of your web component puts, an H1 in there, you can, set the font size of that H1. So it styles any H1 passed into the slot, and then the part button in the HTML allows you to style that specific part from the outside using part button. So these are the, button section and the, anchor section that you can, style. And then of course you've got like some media queries and so on. And then, if I take you to the code, you see this section. It says declare global. It's a simple, TypeScript code. And then it's going to say interface HTML element tag name map my element, my element. It's like a mapping. So this tells TypeScript that whenever I am using my element inside of my template, it knows it's an instance of my element. It's not required to write that code, but it is going to help you with IntelliSense code completion, type safety, and things. So this helps you get the code auto completion when accessing document.query selector, for example, right? And prevent type errors when writing or using the custom element in TypeScript. So it's considered to be like a best practice to add that to your components. With that out of the way, I know that it could be, overwhelming. You have a lot of things to comprehend, but no worries, because we're going to talk about all of these in full detail as we go through the episodes. First, I want to create my own, component. So let's create the first component. We'll prepare our first component structure. As you can see here, it's a very, very simple component. So let's go through these, right? We have chosen the name book card, as you can see here. And then we are extending the let element. We have declared some stylings for the card element. And then we are rendering a div element with this class name, which is going to get these, styles. and there are no reactive properties, nothing, right? We have like a static web component. So let's go on and implement this inside of this, type, inside of this file. We're going to create a folder called components and then bookcard.ts. So if I take you here, I'm going to create the components folder and then bookcard.ts. So this is the component that we're going to develop. This simple element doesn't have any slots, but let's talk a bit about slots to better understand the flexibility they provide. I'm going to get back to the notes to talk about slots, but first let me write the code for this simple template. So I'm going to import the dependencies that I want, let element, HTML, CSS, as I told you about. I'm going to import custom element as my decorator. This allows me to come up with a specific name for my element. I'm going to use the custom element decorator. I'm going to call my component bookcard. I'm going to export the bookcard class. I'm going to extend the let element type, and then I'm going to create my styles. So let's declare the padding, a border radius. I want a box shadow. And then let's create the template itself using render. As we saw, we've got a very simple HTML element, HTML output for our web component. It's a simple div with a specific class, h3 p tag. There are no slots, no reactive properties, nothing. I wanted to create a very simple component, and we're done with this, right? So this is our simple component. Now let's talk a little bit about slots. This is important. I kind of touched upon the idea of slots, but I want to dive deeper to better understand the idea behind slots. So think of slot as a placeholder inside of your component where the outside content, the consumer of your web component, can inject or insert something. Let's talk about a simple example. So suppose you have a custom element in which you are displaying an H1, as you can see here. Now inside of your component, you have this. So you are creating a div element, and then inside of this, you are exposing a slot. So the outside world, the consumer of this web component, can inject something, can insert something for this slide. So this is like a placeholder. So what happens is that the H1 tag with its content gets inserted into the slot, so the actual result in the browser is going to be this. So you have the template, and instead of the slot, you have this H1 tag. This concept is present in other frameworks and libraries as well, because this makes your web components very reusable. So why is this useful? Because it allows your component to be flexible and reusable. You can design the structure, but still let users insert whatever content they want in that placeholder, in that slot. Without slots, your web component is not going to be reusable. So if your component didn't have a slot, then this that you wrote in your code will be ignored. So because your component doesn't have a slot, to get that H1 tag and insert it inside of that placeholder, so it's going to be ignored. It's not going to be shown at all. Now, to see the element we defined in action, update the index.html by adding a script tag for this new element and then use it like this. So as you can see here, I am using this script tag, right? And then I am using the bookcard component. So if I take you to index.html, you can see here that for the the custom element that we studied, we've got this my element, and this is the code that it's gonna put in that slot. I'm gonna comment this out, and I am going to not here. I am going to put my script tag here. So this is the script tag that we have already for the my element TS. I'm gonna put my script tag for my book card, and then what I can do is to start using my book card web component like this. As you can see, these are the static, text content that we created inside of our book card. And if, of course, I change this, and I don't, even have to save this because VS Code is going to auto-save the file. I can change I can see the changes automatically. So this is the way to, use one simple web component. We defined it inside of our index.html. We added the script tag, right? This is the path to our, TypeScript file for our component, and then we can use it like this. Make a small update in index.css. Yeah, let's make this update as well inside of index.css. So what I want to do is to get to the body and write this piece of code. I'm going to set some margins. I'm going to set display to flex. Flex direction is going to be a column. And then I'm going to align my items to center, justify content to center. Let's say set a min width as well and a min height. So this is better because we're going to, create some other components as well. We might probably update the CSS a couple of times to better see what is going on. So we, added the CSS now. Let's talk about the recap. So in this episode, we learned what lit is. It's a fast, lightweight, expressive library, allowing us to create web components. It does the heavy lifting. Of course, you can create web components without lit, but it's going to be very tedious. Lit does the heavy lifting for you. This compares to other framework technologies, front-end technologies like React that are used to create full-fledged applications. With lit, we don't want to create full-fledged applications. We want to create custom web components that act like native web components based on Shadow DOM and other, features of browsers. And we kind of set up a lit project using Vite, and we created our first component using Shadow DOM, and I showed you how we can, use them. But the component that we, created is very simple compared even to the default component that the project creates, that, my element component that had slots, reactive properties, and event handler. Our component was so simple, but we're not gonna, finish here. There are so many things that we need to learn and to implement. So I'm gonna wrap up this video here. I hope you join me in the second one as well. If you enjoyed watching the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could, give it a thumbs up, like it, share it with a friend, and join me in the next episode as well.